discussion of the trends and changes in religious education and faith formation in our Unitarian Universalist movement. And the title for our webinar comes from the paper by Kim Sweeney called The Death of Sunday School, which indicates the seriousness of the changes that we're experiencing. I want to offer us a time of centering and a chalice lighting. I'll light my chalice here with the words of Aberjani from his book, The River of Winged Dreams. The death of a dream can in fact serve as the vehicle that endows it with new form. I'm getting a little feedback. Could we mute everybody? Thanks. The death of a dream can in fact serve as the vehicle that endows it with new form, with reinvigorated substance, with a fresh flow of ideas, and splendidly revitalized color. I offer this chalice lighting in the spirit that faith formation may live on, and live on stronger and revitalized and expanded and more beautiful and powerful than what we might be leaving behind. Let's do some introductions. First off, I'm Sarah Gibb Millspaugh. I am on the congregational life staff of our Pacific Western region. And I have a background as a lifelong UU and a lay leader, and then as a parish minister serving a congregation. I also have worked on the development of several of our landmark curricula for the Unitarian Universalist Association. Our Coming of Age program, our Whole Lives program. I was on the team that created the series and launched it. And also our Tapestry of Faith program. I was the adult programs coordinator and worked to develop those resources. So as you can see, as the product of UU Sunday School and as someone who has developed resources for Sunday School, I have also been coming from a place where I've been very invested in that model. But at the same time, as a parent of a younger child and someone who stopped being in parish ministry when he was about 2 years old, I've started to see it from the other side as a parent who is free to do whatever I want on Sunday morning and can make choices. And I've started to see some of the ways that our congregations are succeeding and not succeeding so well in capturing the attention of families and holding and nurturing us as families. And we also have Nancy Lopez Mancias, who is our brand new events coordinator for the Pacific Western region, and it's a delight to have her navigating this webinar with us. And I want to hear some more about you, and we have a little poll that Nancy will launch for us. And when the poll goes up, I want you to answer those questions, and then we will review them. Nancy, are you able to get that poll? Okay, great. There we go. So what relationship do you have with congregation-based faith formation and religious education? You can check off if you're a professional religious educator, minister, teacher, facilitator, parent, caregiver, alumnus, and check off all that apply. Then also you're here in this webinar because, and you can also check off what all that apply here. And then in the last 10 years, active participation of children and youth in your congregation has gone up, gone down, stayed the same, complicated, you have no idea. Check off your motivation there and what's happened in your congregation there. So wait a little bit longer. We've had about 25% of our votes come in. Now 33, 41. All right, we're making it up. 50% have voted. 58, 66. Almost everyone has voted. Is everyone who's going to vote? Have you all voted? Almost. One more participant needs to hit send. Now, are you seeing the results as they come in? Yes. All right, well, let's end the poll and we'll review those results. We have our biggest group here, about 3/4 of us are professional religious educators. A little bit less than half are ministers of congregations, and I'm so excited that that means that several ministers also checked off that they are religious educators, because if ministry is about anything, it's about faith formation and religious education. We have about 55% who actively teach or facilitate UU programs for children and youth. 64% are a parent or caregiver of someone who's currently involved in UU children and youth programs. And nearly 1/3 of us are alumni of UU programs for children and youth, myself included. And the reasons that we're here in this webinar, we had 91% saying they're reevaluating their programs for children and youth. So a time of reevaluation and adjustment, this webinar could really help along that way, because what Kim Sweeney is really asking us to do is to look and reevaluate and see how what we are doing is meeting people's needs or not. What we're currently doing isn't working as well as it used to, was a common response, 64%. 73% said they read Kim Sweeney's paper and they agree, but they're not yet sure how to enact what she's talking about, right? There is no clear roadmap. So we're in this together, and one of my hopes today is that we can develop partnerships to address these together, and just recognize some of the other people who are here on the call, some of the people who we can be in conversation with. 36% are already shifting their focus to family ministry. And then there's the mysterious other is 18%. In the last 10 years, active participation of children and youth in the congregation has gone down. That's 64%. And as you'll see in the next slides, that is a fairly typical thing. Stayed steady, 9%, and it's complicated, 27%. Yes, so many of us have complicated situations where we can't really measure the overall participation because we don't have good records, we changed our way of keeping records, we have done something very different. It can be very complicated. So it's a delight to have each of you here. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to have some times for sharing and asking questions, and you can always be using the chat to communicate during the event, and I can indeed see the chat, so I'll be able to respond right away to that. So the last question was about participation going up or down or staying the same or being complicated, and let's look. These are our membership numbers. When congregations that are members of the UUA contact the UUA in the wintertime each year to renew their membership certification, they report the number of adult members, or actually it's sometimes congregations have teenagers as members as well who are minors. So the total membership of teens and adults, and then the total children and youth numbers. And you can see our adult membership has gone down a little bit in the last 2006 and 2016. And our children and youth membership, though, has gone down by nearly 25% of enrollment in our congregations. And some of that is generational, in that the I generation is smaller than the millennial generation, but there are also many cultural trends that we are facing. And many of you, I'm sure, have heard about these trends before reading Kim's paper. But some of what we're dealing with are there are many alternatives to participating in a religious community on the weekend. Before it was, house of worship versus house of worship. You either belong to a church or a synagogue or a temple or a mosque. Everybody had something. Not even, even the atheists and agnostics would flock to the UU congregations in some cities because it was just expected that people would be affiliated with something, especially, say, in the 1950s when many of our congregations were at their membership heydays. But now there is the house of worship versus everything else. And I really discovered this when suddenly I didn't need to go to church on Sunday morning in 2013 when I concluded my parish ministry. I would be out on Sunday mornings with my toddler. We'd be getting invited to birthday parties on Sunday mornings. There was brunch, there was golf, there was all kinds of things going on, soccer games, or families having the only time that their entire week that they don't have to get up and go. So the competition has indeed changed. And we've also been dealing with the trend of the rise of the nuns. The people who, when asked what their religious identity is, they say nothing in particular. So this is not even the people who say, I'm Christian, but I only go to church on Christmas. This is the people who don't even say that. It's not just participation. It's they don't even have a religion that they identify with. And so the number of nuns has been increasing tremendously. It's the blue line in this graph. And this is just 7 years from 2007 to 2014. This light blue line has gone up and up and up and continues to go up. The y-axis is not millions, it's percentages, Eric Bliss asks. So the percentage of the population that answers nothing in particular has been going up, which means that people are less likely to be coming into our congregations because they've already experienced congregational life in another tradition or in Unitarian Universalism. So what that means is when they think, gosh, there's a hole in my heart, I need community, I need love, I need support, they're not so automatically going to be seeking out a congregation because they don't even know what the congregation offers. And Generation X, millennials, each successive generation has less and less experience with religion and even knowing to seek us out. So all of those things contribute to our Sunday school programs having smaller attendance, but there's more to it. Kimberley Sweeney, who is now with Courageous Faith Consulting, but was on the staff of the UUA in a role similar to mine, but in the in the New England region. She is a credentialed religious educator, and she really saw, especially in New England, that the Sunday school model was just not working, that the numbers of children and youth participating were going down, and congregations were fighting about it, blaming the religious educator for not doing as good of a job, or blaming the minister for not bringing in the families, or blaming the parents who were so self-absorbed they weren't volunteering, but not really taking the view from, say, 50,000 feet that shows that the very model of Sunday school is not something that was working so well anymore. Her paper's thesis is that the graded Sunday school model of religious education is no longer vital or viable for the majority of our congregations. Now, of course, for some congregations, it's thriving, some of the larger ones. I participate in the UU congregation down in Hillcrest in San Diego. It's one of our larger congregations, and they're able to do family ministry and a graded Sunday school program. They're large, they're thriving, they have resources. But in the majority of our congregations, it's not the case that this model is vital or viable anymore. And Kim says we need a paradigm shift toward family ministry and whole congregation worship. A paradigm shift. So tell me in the chat, you know, do you buy this? Do you agree that we need a paradigm shift? People are taking a little bit to get to their keyboards. Yes, yes. Yes, Hannah says yes. We have really invested a lot in the Sunday school model. And one thing that was fascinating for me to learn as someone who was born in the 70s, that the Sunday school model as we know it and understand it is actually not that much older than me. The heyday of it in many ways was the 50s. And the idea of Sunday school is that there are graded classrooms and they have regular and planned teaching and learning, and there are kids in the class while the parents worship. So worship becomes a primarily adult event, and the kids might start in the worship service and then go out, which is how most of the congregations that I've been a part of in my life work on most Sundays when we're not doing a multi-gen service. But Kim is asking us to look at that as our default. So I'm seeing some of the responses to the paradigm shift question that, you know, some of us feel like, yes, we do need a paradigm shift, but they're not ready to throw the whole Sunday thing out. Yep. Being sold on family ministry, but having questions about worship models, and also thinking of what it looks like to replace a Sunday program with another program. Yeah. Absolutely. This is not an easy shift to make, and it's a shift that we all have some agency in deciding about. If anything, it could help us really think about how well our Sunday school model is serving our congregation, and then if we determine that it really is, then we keep it, or we tweak it, or we make some minor changes, or we just reinvent. It depends on what we learn when we do some critical thinking about this. So what has weakened Sunday school? And there's clearly been the demographic changes. There's also the scarcity of family time and families wanting to be together more on Sundays because the rest of the week they are not getting to be together as much. But what else would you name that has weakened Sunday school? So type that in the chat. The picture there is a picture that I took of a congregational church, a very large congregational church building in Cambridge, Massachusetts. The church closed, the congregation moved to a small shared space, and a university bought the building and now has turned it into a concert hall. But it represents some of the change of what used to be default, what used to be thriving, and is no longer. Competing commitments, Amy names that many of the families that are enrolled in OWL say they only have time for one thing. Yeah, that makes sense. So if it's OWL that year, they don't, and if OWL happens a different time than Sunday morning, they don't come to Sunday morning. Cultural shifts, more options on Sunday morning. What about volunteers? Julia writes, there's been a loss of status for Sunday school teachers in the congregation. It's not a high status volunteer role. Yes, the association of being in the service, being in the choir, those things being more high status. Children have a larger voice in their participation in this generation. That's true. That is true. A lot of parents are much less likely to drag their children to church come hell or high water than they were 40, 50 years ago. Anne writes, we're a small congregation and volunteers are stretched thin. Yes. And sometimes, you know, if you're a small congregation and you need 12 volunteers to run your program every Sunday, that's quite a lot of people and quite a lot of volunteer recruitment and management. So thinking about what families are like these days and the pressure that they're under, what are some family needs that we could meet better if we were to make a shift away from the Sunday school model and into more of a sense of family ministry? What are some family needs that we could meet better? So if you want to say this out loud, you can raise your hand, and I'll call on you, and you do that through going to the participants button, and then you'll see the chart of participants, and next here, down in the corner, click on the button that says raise hand, or you can write in the chat. Julia writes connecting families to each other, and that's something that we could do better. Anne, I see your hand. You can, I'll unmute you too.
Yeah, hi. I have 2 small children, and they're the majority of the RE program at our small congregation. And I think that there's sometimes I taught the lesson last week, and there's kind of a, I would rather be in the mom role than the teaching role in that scenario, and have more this is how we could apply this in our family, this conflict resolution lesson, or and the other thing that comes to mind is how this is social time. I mean, how could we, do something fun with the kids, like go skiing, which takes a lot of people out of church around Idaho during ski season, or something else that would be around some kind of faith development.
Yeah.
Aspect.
Oh, combining. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate you bringing those things up. So having a chance to be equipped better as a parent for things that you can do at home, for ways that you can be, having that opportunity to go off-site for community and faith formation. I really appreciate that. Sarah Lewis writes multi-generational community, and that's sometimes, that's one of those needs that sometimes we don't even know that we need it until we get it. The chance to be in a setting where you have connections with people all the way from little babies to elders, and it is so rich. And sometimes we don't have a chance to really know one another across the generations in our congregations. Janice talks about welcoming families in the service. And do you mean, Janice, that it's about helping those families experience the service as a welcoming place?
Unmute. But what I mean is, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so what I mean is, when you have that 3-year-old in your lap and they have a little bit of a wiggly moment about mid-service, probably right around when Brod's right in the middle of hitting his point in the sermon. And, some people in the sanctuary may not abide with a child that age in the service. Yeah. You start hearing, why isn't that child in the nursery?
Yeah, so some of it's a culture change issue.
Right.
There's some technical aspects, like trying to get a microphone system that's good enough, or maybe have a space for fidgety toddlers can play. There are some congregations that have taken out their front pews and made like a play space. So there's those parts, but there's also the culture change part of how do we experience it as a blessing when there are the fidgety kids, and there's the culture change piece for some of our parents. Some of our parents seem particularly immune to their children's noise. And there needs to be an aspect of helping to gently, from parent to parent, saying, maybe I could take your kid on a little walk, or something like that to help feel included, but also help the child not be screaming through the whole service.
Well, and what's screaming, sometimes it's wiggly, and that's
sometimes it's wiggly.
Screaming. So there's a bridge to build.
Yeah.
And certainly there's an amount of tolerance that needs to be on both sides.
Yeah.
We offer activity packets. as parents come in, and age appropriate, that can help build that bridge.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you, Janice.
Okay.
And Suzanne Kimmel writes that offering adult education for the parents, yes, that the parents' spiritual journeys are explored and supported. That is so true. I'm so glad you brought that up, because we so often assume that just because our congregation is full of adults that we are meeting their spiritual needs really, really well. And those two things do not equal one another. And also exploring ways that parents can foster religious growth and education with their families. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Equipping those parents. Let's shift to explore some of Kim Sweeney's main points in her paper. She says, as stewards of our Unitarian Universalist faith, it is our responsibility to adapt our approaches to faith formation to these contemporary times. It's our responsibility. And she says that so often it is because we're asking some of the, we're asking questions, but not quite getting at the real issue. We're asking questions like, how can we attract more children and families to our church? What can we do in religious education to make kids want to come? How can we invite more volunteers? Where can we find that perfect religious educator? That even though so much of this is caused by demographic shifts, and even if some of our congregations, like several that I work with closely, are in retirement communities, so several of them don't even have that much of a pool of children to draw from, but they feel that they're not doing church right without a religious education program. So how do we shift away from that and think about how we can adapt, not just hold up default as a model for how we should be? So Kim says that finding the different religious educator is not the key. How many of us have, and I'm just going to ask this rhetorically, you don't need to raise your hand, but how many of us have experienced that pressure of feeling like, no, you are the person who needs to deliver, you are the person who needs to make this whole system work? And, you know, back in my day, there were 200 children in the religious education program. And if we just started doing things how they were then, things would be good. So hiring without restructuring, without looking at the job, without looking at the context, that is not going to be our solution. And then, excuse me, click, there we go. Increasing our staffing to minister to specific subsets of young people maintains age segregation. Now, this might be one of Kim's most controversial points, but saying that this person's here for the children, this person's here for coming of age, this person's here for the youth, and the ministers are there for the adults. That was how things were at the congregation that I was serving in Massachusetts. And you know, it seems great because we're able to offer really excellent quality, age-appropriate education to the different ages. But Kim is pointing out that that same specialization creates a certain amount of age segregation and segmentation of the congregation, so that the children aren't being brought in the same, the children aren't being Unitarian Universalist in its fullness, and aren't getting exposed to our faith in its fullness because they are in their small subsection of the congregation with their professional. So this is something to chew on, something to think about. As someone mentioned polarity management earlier, I think it's a little bit of a polarity, managing the specialty toward the ages and the integration, and how we can hold both of those. Kim also points out that as baby boomers move toward retirement, there are fewer adults. I'm in Generation X. There are fewer people in my generation to volunteer. And we have a lot less discretionary time for volunteering than our parents did, in the way that their lives were structured. So the size of the volunteer pool, Kim says, is cut nearly in half. So we can't assume that we're going to have the same number of plentiful volunteers that we had in the 70s and 80s. Even an amazing curriculum is not going to save the day. You know, that great curriculum that has you doing all these hands-on wonderful things, it helps. It can really bring some life to a classroom. It can make it, you know, it can turn the experience for a kid from deadly boring to really engaging. But what Kim is trying to say is that there's structure, the demographic shifts that we've undergone and the structure, if it hasn't changed, we're not going to be able to go back to those same levels of participation that we used to have. The curriculum is not going to determine whether or not a family participates on Sunday morning. It's much more of the things internal to the family, whether or not they go because of all of the different things that they're dealing with, but also what the experience is, like, that is going to determine whether people come back. And adults need just as much faith formation as children and youth, as we pointed out before. And so if we view adults as part of who we are working with in order to do the faith formation of children, then our task becomes a little different. Kim says we're in the midst of a reformation. You may have seen some of the books that talk about how every 500 years there's a big sea change in institutions, in religion. And there has been a real sea change going on worldwide in terms of religious participation and identity. And we don't know exactly where that is going to leave us, but our Reformation calls for us to decenter those dominant ways of doing things, is a quote from Kim. And to decenter the dominant experiences of the world. It calls for the decentering of the older adult experience, the decentering of whiteness, the decentering of upper class norms, all in the service of our vision for a multicultural, multiracial, and multi-generational Unitarian Universalism. So what we want to start to center on is more of a sense of the family as a unit, a sense of the community, a sense of the generations, kind of moving from an ethic of I, of individualism, to an ethic of we, and also being able to minister from a place that helps families understand and communicate who they are culturally, who they are racially, who they are value-wise, who they are faith-wise, spiritually, to equip people to do that and understand it. Kim concludes that the future of faith formation resides in family ministry. So what she sees is Sunday school model dying, family ministry model rising up. And there are some overlaps with those. We're not throwing out the baby with the bathwater as we change to a family ministry model. There's a quote that she uses from Reggie Joyner, who founded and is the president of the Rethink group. He says, "The church realizes it can't be effective alone, and it needs the home. As family ministry expands, it's also evolving. Just being family friendly no longer counts. The old approach of keeping people of all ages busy with lots of family specific programming is missing the mark. All the random acts of ministry that churches line up for families overload church and family schedules, ultimately competing with the very families you're trying to help." That's a pretty intense quote. Because so often we try to reach families and we say, we're going to do this family event and that family event and that family event. And then we're frustrated that people don't come. And part of the underlying issue is that they are overloaded. And one of the reasons that families do seek out a faith community is to help with that sense of overwhelm and that sense of overload. But then sometimes the experience of being involved in the community is overwhelm, overload. So how do we navigate that with families? Kim articulates a purpose for us and a purpose for us to keep remembering. She says the purpose of faith formation programs is to bring the love and grace of Unitarian Universalism to our families' lives. So when we step back for a moment and think about how do we bring that love and grace? How do we bring that? How do we create a supported path for spiritual maturity for people of all ages? She speaks of some characteristics of what that would look like. Faith formation for all ages. She talks about mixing and huddling. I like those terms. I hadn't heard them before, just that age-wise, we have times when we mix, when everybody of all ages is together, and then times when we huddle with our age group. So there can be covenant groups that are for adults. There can be youth group programs that are for high school. There can be programs for kindergartners where they engage in certain things. There can be those, but it's not that huddling is the default that happens every Sunday and mixing is rare. It's that you have more of a balance of those two. She also talks about whole congregation worship, and this is something that some of you expressed some trepidation about. It's something, this I think is one of the biggest shifts to being able to create meaningful multi-generational worship each Sunday. Some of our congregations have made that shift, and I think that as they are learning and finding what works in their communities, we can all learn from those congregations. Kim names some congregations in the paper that are making this shift, and some that I know of are just more in the very beginning stages of that. But how do we create worship that is meaningful and engaging for everyone and engages people with one another? It's the default for so many religious traditions, but it hasn't been the default for Unitarian Universalism for a long time. And so many of us, when we become religious educators or ministers, we just don't have that kind of experience because the congregation we've been worshiping in has been age segregated. So some of us feel really ill-equipped and like we're making it up on our own. So I feel very strongly that that is a real frontier for us as a movement. And perhaps it's just a return to our roots of how things used to be. But how do we help and equip one another to make that change? Also, Kim talks about family ministry is led from a sense of mission, from the congregation's mission. So not just, what are families interested in? Oh, they're interested in watching Star Trek, let's do Star Trek. No, it's what is part of the congregation's mission. If our mission is to nurture spirits and help heal the world, how do we nurture the spirits of the families and help families heal the world? And also, family ministry is led adaptively, not just technically. Many of us have heard of adaptive leadership. It's a model pioneered by Ron Heifetz, and he's written many books. It's Heifetz. And Heifetz talks about how when we don't really know the answer to a problem, it's an adaptive problem. And we can lead one another, we can lead cultural change to make this adaptive change. But that adaptive leadership looks very different than technical leadership. A technical leader, we would say, okay, let's buy this book on family ministry, let's implement everything it did, and bam, we have family ministry. An adaptive leader is of course, pays attention to the technical aspects, but is also looking at making those cultural changes, helping people be able to welcome the change and not just feel the loss of the old way, but helping create the will to really make a change. We live in rapidly evolving times, and we are going to need to be equipped to rapidly respond and evolve what we do. And that is also a very large challenge in our work. So let's take some time to discuss, and you can raise your hand and speak with your video and or your sound, or you can type into the chat. What are some of the ways that we can imagine doing family ministry in our congregations, and what is a next step in equipping your congregation for this shift? What are some ways we can imagine doing family ministry in our congregations, and what is the next step for us? I see that Steve has his hand up. I will unmute you, Steve. There we go. Oops, I'll unmute you again. There. Would you like your camera on?
Sure, why not? I don't care.
Okay, there you go.
This is Steve Mead. I'm an interim consulting in Santa Fe. I've also done settled. We are proceeding along the lines here at UU Santa Fe on a 2-year trajectory to completely change the way we do worship and RE. So we're planning on that 2-year sales cycle that you were just talking about. That's the adaptive part of the change. I'll address one thing, and that's the worship scenario, because I think that's critical. When I served in the OMD district, just prior to this, we had a worship, the UUs had a worship design seminar with Marcia McPhee. And I've been to stuff like this before and go, yeah, I'll go. In 20 minutes, I knew that this was the kind of worship service that millennials and Gen Xers are going to want to have for themselves and their children. So, we're going to be experimenting with some of Marcia McPhee's techniques. It's pretty well suited to this particular congregation. I recommend those of you who have creative ministers to take a look at it and look through her materials. I think you'll be impressed.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm writing Marcia's name into the chat there. Anne asks if you could say the name of the program. Could you write that in the chat, Steve? And Anne has her hand up. Anne, I'll unmute you.
Hey, so it's Marcia McPhee. That's the work he was recommending. Is that correct? Okay. One of the things that we were talking about here among us, it's me, a parent, and a board member, a minister, and then our RE coordinator, is that one of the ways that we could better serve children during the sermon is to have some kind of a worksheet or something that a child of the ages that we have could relate to as part of the service. So they've got something to color or to think about or to read, and then have that as a take-home piece as well with the family. Like, well, how could you implement this in your daily life? And that's not happening right now. So I know that's a very specific idea, but that's what we talked about here for a second.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you very much, Anne. Others, what is some of the ways that you can imagine doing this, or a next step? We're all learning together here. We don't have all the answers. Your next step might be talk with so-and-so, Oh, great. Thank you, Stephen, for putting in that additional information about Marcia McPhee. So Anne has raised her hand again, and Steve has raised his hand again. Is there anyone else who'd like to share? Because I know they've both shared. Okay, I will unmute Stephen.
One of the things that I know we're going to have to do is put families and parents and kids together again.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so to do what we were proposing, at least here at UU Santa Fe, was a faith development hour separate from the worship setting, so that we have, let's say, from 9 to 10, working with our nursery through elementary grades.
Oh, wonderful.
At some time other than Sunday morning.
Mm-hmm.
But the key feature of the way of we are contemplating doing this is that faith development hour with children and youth, parents stay in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Key feature, which is a big sea change for the way we do Unitarian Universalist religious education. That solves a couple of problems. It's not like school.
Mm-hmm.
Parents get to stay with their kids, and everyone gets to know one another. Parents can develop relationships. And lastly, and probably most importantly, if I have a kid 22 hours a year, which is about what it is at twice a month, which is normal these days, I'm teaching parents how to be the religious educator for their children if they stay in that room. So there's a lot, as far as I can tell, that's going for it if we keep at least our parents of elementary grade children in the room with them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I really appreciate you bringing up the piece about 22 hours a year. Because I very much feel that as a parent. I feel like my son gets about an hour of screen time a day, and that screen time is mostly devoted to having him be a consumer. So he's getting consumer education all those hours a day. And the faith formation, religious education, if it was only left to when he was at church, it would really, really be quite sparse. Anne, I will unmute you.
Hi, thanks. It's Jenny Peak, the new minister here in Pocatello. And I guess what's jumping up for me from the lesson so far is the mixing and huddling and the non-compete, don't compete with family time, and then tying it together with faith formation. And so I guess in my head, I'm imagining a new model, a new way of doing it, or a fresh way of doing it, where we invite families, our members, to share what it is that they're doing throughout their week, and to offer some guidelines for how to, like some questions, almost a clinical education model of experience, unpack, and tie it into our faith identity or faith formation, and then go back into the world and repeat and grow. Yeah, so I'm kind of wondering about a model like that.
I like that. And I like the way that it incorporates sort of a praxis model of action reflection going back out into the world. Thank you, Jenny. So I'll read the questions in the chat here. How to address the sense of loss in all this change? Oh yes, I mean that is something that we can support each other in. I think part of what helps people with loss is articulating and helping people understand what's going to be gained, and making it okay for people to name that sense of loss, but being able to have an understanding that things could really become more vital, more alive, more powerful with a shift. And we might not see that power and that vitality right away. It might take a few years to really take off. We launched a family worship program in the congregation where I was parish minister. It was a religious educator, Rebecca Kelly Morgan's idea. It was wonderful. It was a 20-minute service for families before the service. And our first time we had it, I think we had 2 3-year-olds. And it was a little disappointing because I had prepared like a service about Martin Luther King, and explaining that to 2-3-year-olds was challenging. But it grew. It still happens at the congregation 7 years later. And it became a community unto itself. But it didn't just succeed right away, and we have to have the patience to do that, to say something will be gained, and it's going to be something that builds. Janice talks about beginning a parent potluck group with families, and meals, providing meals, having potlucks, anything that makes parenting a little bit easier in terms of serving the children and taking care of all of those things. That helps so much. She says that parents go to the sanctuary for an hour of worship, a check-in, a reflective question and discussion. They get a chance to huddle. The kids are playing with games and an activity, and they come together to clean up and close a circle. It's beautiful. I love that. Yeah, family. There's so many different names for the family ministry evenings that congregations have created, like family fun nights, family faith nights, etc. There's so many ways to do that. And Eric Bliss responds, answering question 1, the religious education team, and when he was in the parish, stated that families would be the focus of their efforts, and they set that intention. And then after that, had a monthly intergenerational experience that included either a family chapel with activities, and also offered family aspects to coming of age and OWL and other programs that were age specific. That's another wonderful way to do family ministry. And the UUA is going to publish soon an Our Whole Lives for Parents concurrent program that can be available for parents of children in the program. Julia asks, is there any conversation about what whole family worship looks like at a larger mid-sized congregations with 2 worship services, but not large enough to have a full service staff support? I know there is conversation about that, and I can help you network around that question, because it is different from integrated worship in a small mid-sized congregation with 1 service. Sometimes there's 1 service that is particularly family focused and has some different songs and music and activities in it than but might have the same sermon as the other service. Yes, and Eric, I'm so glad Eric, my colleague here, mentions Full Week Faith. And this is a program that Karen Bellavance Grace, who is on our New England regional team and is a close colleague of Kim, this is a paper that she wrote for her time as a FOS fellow at Meadville Lombard School. And if you look up fullweekfaith.weebly.com, if you're not familiar with it, it has some wonderful ideas of ways to equip families, and ways that congregations can help equip families for doing faith formation all week. Let's move on. As our time is about to conclude, I want to let you know there are some opportunities to engage further in these questions. The UU Institute, the UU Leadership Institute, which is at uuinstitute.org, is offering a 6-module course this fall with Kimberley Sweeney leading it, called The Death of Sunday School. And the course includes specific coaching and specialized coaching from Kim Sweeney. It costs $300. And it is quite a deal, especially when you add in the specific consulting. And that's sponsored through the UU Leadership Institute. It's a program of the UUA and congregational life. Also, we have a Family Ministry Renaissance module, and Renaissance modules are designed for religious educators as well as other religious professionals. And very active and interested lay leaders as well. And so look for notices about that. Also, we have in our faith development office, we have a new position. I'm blanking on her exact name. I think it's like Innovation in Faith Specialist, is Reverend Marisol Caballero. And Mari is hosting quarterly conversations about innovation for innovators. And if you'd like to get hooked into that, if you're trying to create some innovation and you want some support on that, you can write to Mari at mcaballero@uua.org. Also, there's me, for those of you in Pacific Western region, which is most of you. I am a resource for you. You can contact me directly about the changes that you're seeking to make. And we also have in every region a lifespan faith formation specialist who can be of service to you. We have a whole multi-generational ministry collection that Kimberley Sweeney helped create when she was on UUA staff. It's on uua.org/multigenerational. And then a final piece, our outreach team. I used to be in the outreach office of the UUA, and I helped develop these resources, and they're about to be released. If you are eager for them, you can get the draft from me, but they need to be copy edited and posted online, and will sometime this late fall or early winter. But there are tools for reaching families through social media and creating events that specifically welcome families, in particular LGBTQ families and interfaith families, two types of families that we, I think we have a real niche in being able to reach and minister to. Let us close with the words of Anne Hillman. We look with uncertainty beyond the old choices for clear-cut answers to a softer, more permeable aliveness, which is every moment at the brink of death. For something new is being born in us, if we but let it. We stand at a new doorway, awaiting that which comes, daring to be human creatures, vulnerable to the beauty of existence, and learning to love. So may it be. I thank you for sharing this journey with me today. I will follow up with a link to our slides, and the video and slides and resources will be posted online soon when our staff are able to edit them and post them online. It could be a month or two, but if you want to see the draft in the meantime to share with someone, just let me know. I'm going to put back up our slide with more information about how to engage. And I look forward to seeing you in the future and continuing the work with you of supporting the faith development of all. Thank you.